Hello and welcome. If you've never studied Macbeth before, or if you've opened the play and immediately felt a little overwhelmed, don't worry. That's completely normal. This lesson is designed to give you everything you need before you begin reading. We're not going to analyse quotes in detail, and we're not going to work through the plot scene by scene. Instead, think of this lesson as your map. By the end, you'll know who the important characters are, what themes to watch for, what kind of play Macbeth actually is, and what examiners will eventually expect you to understand. So let's get started. At its heart, Macbeth is the story of a man who is given a glimpse of power and then becomes willing to do almost anything to achieve it. Macbeth begins the play as a respected war hero. He is brave, loyal, and admired by the king. However, after meeting three mysterious witches, he hears a prophecy that suggests he could one day become king. That single idea begins to grow inside him. As the play progresses, ambition turns into obsession. Obsession leads to murder. Murder leads to guilt. And guilt eventually destroys everything. One question I want you to keep in mind throughout the play is this. How far would you be willing to go to get something you desperately wanted? That question sits at the centre of Macbeth. Before you start reading Macbeth, it's important to understand what kind of play it is. Macbeth is a tragedy. Now, when we hear the word tragedy, we often think about something sad happening. In literature, however, tragedy has a much more specific meaning. A tragedy follows the downfall of a great person. The key thing to remember is that Macbeth does not begin as a villain. He begins as a hero. The audience admire him, other characters admire him, but he has a flaw. In Macbeth's case, that flaw is ambition. As the play progresses, that flaw becomes more powerful until it eventually destroys him. So as you're reading, don't ask yourself whether Macbeth is good or bad. Instead, ask yourself, when does the hero begin to fall? One thing that often helps students is understanding how the play is organised before they begin reading. Macbeth is divided into 5 acts. You can think of these almost like 5 chapters. Act 1 introduces Macbeth and the witch's prophecy. Act 2 contains one of the most important events in the play. Act 3 shows Macbeth beginning to change. Act 4 shows the consequences of those changes, and Act 5 brings everything to its dramatic conclusion. When reading the play, try not to get lost in individual scenes. Always keep asking yourself, where am I in Macbeth's journey? Because Shakespeare carefully constructs the play around his rise and fall. There are 2 most important characters in the entire play. Macbeth. He is fascinating because he is full of contradictions. He is brave but fearful, loyal but ambitious, violent but deeply guilty. Throughout the play, Shakespeare explores the battle between these different sides of Macbeth's personality. Lady Macbeth is equally as interesting. At the beginning of the play, she appears stronger than Macbeth. She is determined, intelligent, and completely focused on achieving power. However, as the play continues, something surprising happens. The character who seems strongest at the start begins to unravel. Pay close attention to how both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth change. Their transformations are central to understanding the play. Although Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are central figures, several other characters play incredibly important roles. Duncan represents good kingship. Banquo acts as a contrast to Macbeth because he receives a prophecy but chooses a different path. Macduff becomes one of Macbeth's greatest opponents and serves as a moral force throughout the play. Malcolm represents hope and the possibility of restoring order. And then, of course, there are the witches. As you read, try not to see these characters as separate individuals. Instead, think about what they reveal about Macbeth himself. Many of them act almost like a mirror, showing us different choices Macbeth could have made. The play opens with the witches. This is not an accident. Shakespeare wants the audience to feel unsettled immediately. The witches create mystery, uncertainty, and fear. But here is the most important thing to understand. The witches predict. They do not control. At no point do they force Macbeth to commit any crime. They present possibilities. Macbeth chooses what to do next. This is one of the biggest debates in the play. Was Macbeth controlled by fate, or was he responsible for his own actions? There is no simple answer, which is exactly why examiners love this topic. Now let's look at the three themes that sit right at the heart of Macbeth. The first is ambition. Without ambition, there is no play. Macbeth's ambition drives every major decision he makes. What's interesting is that Shakespeare doesn't present ambition as completely evil. After all, ambition can motivate people to achieve great things. The problem comes when ambition becomes more important than morality. The second major theme is power. Throughout the play, Shakespeare repeatedly asks, what happens when someone gains power in the wrong way? Macbeth gets exactly what he wants, but he never finds peace or happiness. Instead, the more power he gains, the more fearful and paranoid he becomes. Finally, we have guilt. One of Shakespeare's greatest achievements is showing guilt almost as a physical force. Characters don't simply feel guilt, they see things, they hear things, they lose sleep, they begin to unravel psychologically. As you read, keep asking yourself, which of these three themes is driving action in this scene? And very often, you will discover it's all three. Beyond those core themes, there are three more ideas that appear throughout the play. The first is fate versus free will. The witches seem to predict the future, but Macbeth still makes choices. Shakespeare deliberately refuses to give us a clear answer. That's because the debate itself is more interesting than any solution. The second theme is appearance versus reality. Characters often pretend to be something they're not. People hide their true intentions. Friends become enemies. Trust becomes dangerous. In many ways, Macbeth is a play about deception. The final theme is kingship and tyranny. Shakespeare constantly compares good rulers with bad rulers. Duncan represents the qualities of a good king. Macbeth increasingly represents the qualities of a tyrant. As you read, think carefully about the type of leader Shakespeare wants us to admire. This becomes particularly important when you eventually start writing essays. One thing that separates stronger GCSE students from weaker ones is their ability to notice patterns. Shakespeare consistently repeats certain images throughout the play. These are called motifs. The most important is blood. Blood represents violence, guilt, and the lasting consequences of crime. you'll notice that even when blood isn't physically present, characters often imagine it. Sleep is another important motif. Sleep represents innocence, peace, and a clear conscience. When Macbeth commits murder, Shakespeare suggests he destroys his ability to rest peacefully. Darkness appears repeatedly whenever evil actions are planned or committed. Characters often call upon darkness to hide their intentions. Clothing is used to symbolize identity and power. Several times Shakespeare will suggest Macbeth is wearing a role that doesn't truly fit him. Finally, weather reflects the state of the world. When the natural order is disrupted, storms and unnatural events often follow. The more of these motifs you notice, the richer your understanding of the play will become. Let's be honest, almost everyone struggles with Macbeth at first, and that's completely normal. One reason is the language. Shakespeare was written almost 400 years ago, and some of the vocabulary can feel unfamiliar. The good news is that you do not need to understand every single word. We focus first on understanding what is happening. The meaning will become clearer over time. Another challenge is the number of characters and titles. At the beginning, it can feel like lots of Scottish noblemen are being introduced very quickly. Don't panic. Within a few scenes, you'll naturally begin to recognise who everyone is. Finally, Macbeth operates on multiple levels at once. There's the story itself, then there are the themes, then there are the symbols, then the context. Even experienced readers discover new things every time they revisit the play. So if something feels confusing at first, that's not a sign of failure, it's simply part of studying Shakespeare. Before you begin reading, it's worth understanding what the examiners eventually want to see. The first thing they care about is character development. How does Macbeth change? How does Lady Macbeth change? Strong students track those transformations throughout the play. The second thing examiners care about are themes. Can you identify Shakespeare's big ideas? Can you explain how they develop across the play? The third thing is writers' methods. Examiners don't just want to know what happens, they want to know how Shakespeare creates meaning. This includes language, structure, imagery, symbolism, and dramatic techniques. Context also matters. Understanding the world Shakespeare was writing for can unlock deeper meanings. Finally, the stronger students offer alternative interpretations. For example, is Macbeth a villain, or is he a tragic victim of his own ambition? The ability to explore multiple perspectives is often what separates a grade 6 answer from an 8 or 9 answer. Now you have everything you need before opening the play. You know what kind of story Macbeth is, you know the major characters, you know the key themes, you know the symbols to watch for, and you understand what examiners are looking for. The next step is to begin exploring the play itself. We'll start with a full plot summary, so you always know exactly what's happening. After that, we'll dive into context, character analysis, themes, quotes, and eventually essay writing. Remember this, Macbeth isn't difficult because it's complicated, it's difficult because it's layered. Every time you read it, you'll notice something new. And that's exactly why it has remained one of Shakespeare's most famous plays for over 400 years. So when you open Macbeth for the first time, don't worry about understanding everything. Just start reading. The rest will come with practice. So let's begin.